Is it possible that a set of wooden tablets with ancient glyphs handed down over the centuries carried the true history of the Native American Lenni Lenape people? Is it possible that this history even overlaps the biblical accounts so strongly that they are actually retelling the same past about creation, the beginning of mankind, Satan's role in corrupting the earth and humanity, the worldwide flood, and Noah's role in saving the human line? Join us on this journey to find out. It was Monday, October 16th, 1679. Dutch traveler Jasper Dankaerts meets an 80-year-old Lenni Lenape native man in present-day New Jersey. Jasper records the following. In the morning, there came an Indian to our house, a man about 80 years of age, whom our people called Jasper, who lived at a Hackensack or at Acconin. We asked him where he believed he came from. He answered, from his father. And where did your father come from? We said. And your grandfather and great-grandfather and so on to the first of the race. He was silent for a little while, then took a piece of coal out of the fire where he sat and began to write upon the floor. He first drew a circle, a little oval, to which he made 4 paws or feet, a head and a tail. This, said he, is a tortoise lying in the water around it. And he moved his hand round the figure, continuing, this was or is all water, and so at first was the world, or the earth. When the tortoise gradually raised its round back up high, and the water ran off of it, and thus the earth became dry. He then took a little straw and placed it on end in the middle of the figure, and proceeded. The earth was now dry, and there grew a tree in the middle of the earth. And the root of this tree sent forth a sprout beside it, and there grew upon it a man, who is the first male. This man was then alone, and would have remained alone, but the tree bent over until its top touched the earth, and there shot therein another root, from which came forth another sprout, and there grew upon it the woman. And from these two are all men produced. 141 years after this event, another Lenape native, a tribal historian named Olum became ill and was brought to health with the help of a Dr. Ward. In return, Olum gave him the Walam Olum, a set of 183 glyphs engraved and painted on wooden tablets that describe the history of the Lenape people going back millennia. In 1822, Ward gave them to a friend, Constantine Samuel Rafinesque, a professor at Transylvania University in Kentucky, who is fluent in over 12 languages. After 14 years of carefully deciphering the glyphs, with the help from both European and native experts, he published the Walam Olum in book form in 1836. So, why are these two events important? How are they connected? Well, the 1679 origin account overlaps strongly with the Walam Olum. Even though these accounts are separated by over 100 years, they share 10 common elements regarding how God framed the world and mankind, even using very similar graphical representations, and it only gets more amazing. The Walam Olum carries the history of the Lenni Lenape people for centuries, all the way back to the beginning, where it describes the Creator, the great Manitou, creating the world, sun, moon, stars, land, water, and all living things. Then creation harmony is disrupted when the evil Manitou, the black snake, brings chaos, sickness, death, and conflict into the world. Next comes a catastrophic flood, but humanity is rescued by Nanabush, the grandfather of all men, their version of Noah. Similar flood accounts are echoed in over 300 native stories. As their story continues, thousands of them head to America, crossing the Bering Sea. A series of 95 chiefs lead them across America, eventually settling on the East Coast. Along this journey, they face harsh climates, beasts, famine, and wars with the dreaded snake people, called the Makowini, or the Big Men, giants who practiced dark magic who were associated with the evil snake. The last glyph describes encountering white men on ships in 1620 and reads, "Who are they?" When the Walam Olum first came on the scene, it was put under tough scrutiny by heavyweight scholars of the 19th century. Scholars like Daniel Brinton and Smithsonian author E.G. Squire published extensive studies boldly supporting the Walam Olum as authentic Lenape history. A later publication of the Indiana Historical Society in 1954 also largely supported its credibility. Then, in the 1990s, the Walam Olum came under attack by those who were threatened by just how strongly it aligned with Scripture, causing some to lose faith in its credibility. But the tables turned just a few years ago when Harvard-trained geneticist Dr. Nathaniel Jeanson revealed overwhelming support for its validity. By tracing the Y chromosome markers passed down from father to son across generations, Jeanson confirmed the migratory routes, direction, and even timing in the Walam Olum.
The Delaware people, they were one of the East Coast Algonquian peoples, have a document called the Red Record or the Walam Olum. This document describes a migration, and the dates that we can infer from internal clues in the Red Record are exactly in line with genetics. So my argument to those who doubt the authenticity and veracity of this record is to say, okay, if you think Rafinesque forged a document in the early 1800s, how is it possible that he could do such a good job forging it that he anticipated genetic discoveries 200 years in the future? I don't think that's possible. It seems implausible. Instead, I think the explanation is Rafinesque obtained an authentic Delaware document that described an authentic history, and it's a vital clue to understand the origin of the Algics, the Wampanoag, the Massachusetts, and their backstory, where they were when they arrived in Massachusetts before the Pilgrims arrived. I want you to notice that this reconstruction, I'm following heavily David McCutcheon's reconstruction. So this book cover is actually from his 1993 translation, and I've redrawn here from the clues in the Red Record that he used to infer where they were at specific times. Now, let me add one more piece of data here that'll help you understand this better. The crux of the Red Record is a list of sachems or chieftains or leaders. They call them sachems. Essentially, so-and-so, they'll give a name. So-and-so was the sachem, and we started agriculture. Something significant that happened during his reign. So-and-so was the sachem, we started recording our histories. So-and-so was the sachem, and we fought these people over here. So-and-so was the sachem, and then we lost to these people over here. It reads like straightforward history, and from those clues, we can infer where they were at what time and what they were doing. But I want you to notice that this reconstruction begins in the northwest, goes south, but then basically proceeds west to east, which is exactly what the hierarchy from linguistics shows, a west to east migration. So it's not just that the Red Record is consistent with genetics, it's also consistent with linguistics, and I'll give some examples here in a minute. It's also consistent with other nations' indigenous histories. So what exactly is the backstory then to the Algics, the Algonquins? What does their history say? 900s, they arrive in Alaska across the Bering Strait, and they talk about immediately fighting enemies, that there were people here before them. And this is consistent with genetics and other things that I don't have time to get into. It's authentic. At contact, the dominant peoples on the western coast, Pacific coast of Alaska were the members of the Eskimo Aleut language family. They weren't just in Alaska at contact, they had reached all the way over to Greenland. Archaeology identifies an eastward migration from Alaska eastward, eventually ending up again in Greenland. And what's interesting is the timing archaeologically. This west to east migration is very close to the timing of the Algic arrival, which implies a potential cause-effect relationship. As if the Algic arrived, they talk about defeating enemies, and perhaps the losers, perhaps the Eskimo Aleut language family members, as a result, go fleeing eastward, eventually ending up in Greenland. Another group of peoples in Alaska at the time of contact, which is a good starting point for thinking backwards in time about who may have been there, were members of the Athabascan language family. These may not be familiar to you, but if you've ever heard of the Apache or Navajo, who were in Arizona and New Mexico at the time of contact, they are members of the Athabascan language family. The Mescalero Apache in particular have, as part of their girls' puberty ceremony, a recounting. This 4-day ceremony retells the history of their migration. They talk about, we came from the north, the land of cold and ice, and went south. This fits linguistics. This is actually technically the Ayak Athabascan language family. The deepest division linguistically in this family is between Ayak, way up here in Alaska, and the rest of the Athabascans, implying or consistent with them originating up there and then eventually going southward. These may have also been people that the Algics encountered when they first arrived and defeated. By the AD 1000s, The Algic were further south, going down the western part of Canada. Again, the majority of the Red Record talks about so-and-so is the sachem, here's what happened. So-and-so is the sachem, here's what happened. During this period, they say 10 sachems passed. They don't name the sachems. 10 of them passed without names, and they say this was a time of much evil. It's unclear whether the Algics were the cause of the much evil or the recipients. Either way, history wasn't recorded, or it was history I don't think they wanted to talk about. Who may have been involved in this evil? At contact, members of the Salish language family were in the Pacific Northwest. Now, growing up in Wisconsin, I don't remember much learning about the Pacific Northwest peoples, so they weren't familiar to me. They might be familiar to you, the Salish language family members. Their own histories talk about migrating from the east westward, I think, again, based on details that I don't have time to get into, describe probably Minnesota or that region as the origin point, then migrating across the plains into a forest region, eventually ending up on the western coast, western region of the United States and Canada. I think they were likely there when the Algics passed that way and could have been involved in this time of much evil. At some point, the Algics move on the Great Plains. They talk about growing crops. On the Great Plains, this is now the AD 1100s, they mention a number of enemies they had to fight. I also want to mention that during this whole process, again, I said this is from the Delaware, but there's a lot of clues indicating this was not just a Delaware history. I think this is the ancestors of the Delaware, and it includes the ancestors of many other members of the Algic language family. There's 6 or 7 points in the Red Record where they say, at this period, this people group went away, or this subgroup broke away. Sometimes it's, hey, we multiplied, we were enjoying life, we needed more rooms, we kind of separated into different bands. Other times it's, there was a fight, and so these people were angry, and so they went away and left us. The timing and the number of these divisions correlates with linguistics. It correlates with the indigenous histories of other members of the Algic language family. So I can tell you that one of these divisions represents the separation of the Cheyenne Menominee. There's another one that's the Arapaho, Gros Ventre, and I think the Cree. The Cheyenne's own history talk about coming from Minnesota. So I think effectively what's going on is the Algics are on the Great Plains. There's a group that breaks away and goes eastward. That's where the Cheyenne and Menominee ended up. Later in history, close to or after contact, the Cheyenne moved back westward and then onto the Great Plains. And this is the type of history we can begin to reconstruct with the Red Record, which is from the Delaware, but describes, I would contend, the history of the entire language family. There was a group of enemies that they described. There's also, of course, internal conflict, but a conflict that was external was with a group of people they called the North Walkers. This is pre-European introduction of the horse. My presumption is everyone is moving by walking. But who are the North Walkers? Remember that the Athabascan language family was up here in Alaska, but that the Navajo and Apache are also members in Arizona, New Mexico at the time of contact. The Mescalero Apache migration account puts dates on their migration, and the Mescaleros say we were actually the last of 4 groups moving southward. To make a long story short, my guess is the timing of the Athabascan migrations, the timing of the Algic conflict here in the plains. If you put those pieces of data together, I think what's going on is the Algic are actually fighting the ancestors, the Athabascan ancestors who are migrating southward, possibly the ancestors of Apache and Navajo. Eventually, the Algic got tired of all that fighting on the plains, and they said, let's just go eastward. It was at the Mississippi where they had the greatest battle, or where the greatest battle in all of pre-European North America occurred. Stick with us for the next episode where I'll give you the details, where we talk about the greatest hero in all of pre-Columbian North American history. To skip ahead, they eventually did make it across the Mississippi, where there were additional separations, origins of subgroups within the Algic language family. The Shawnee separated shortly after the crossing of the Mississippi. The Ojibwe or Chippewa would have as well. Their own accounts describe coming from the Atlantic. So they, I think then, if you put the pieces together, left here, migrated over to the Atlantic, and then migrated backwards, where they ended up at the Great Lakes by the time of contact. And then finally, of course, you have the Delawares themselves and the other members of the East Coast Algonquians who arrive in the Atlantic Ocean. But with linguistics and genetics and these indigenous histories and archaeology, I can now tell you that the Massachusetts, Narragansett, and others in New England arrived there just a century and a half before the Pilgrims did. And so now you have the rest of the story of the first Thanksgiving, the backstory to the European Americans' Algonquian neighbors.
Other researchers like David McCutcheon and E.P. Grandin have also confirmed the Walam Olum migration route using archaeological evidence that was discovered well after it was published. Grandin points out that it would require Rafinesque to have superhuman imagination to dream up the migration account and timing described in the Walam Olum, because there's no way he could have possibly known where at least 6 of the tribes described in the Walam Olum lived. Information only confirmed by archaeological findings after the Walam Olum was recorded by Rafinesque. Grandin explains that another really stunning coincidence is the burning of the stockades described in the Walam Olum. And if Rafinesque dreamed this up 150 years before the stockades at Cahokia and Angel Mounds were excavated, then one would have to admit that he had an unbelievably great creative talent. Grandin also doesn't believe Rafinesque could have pushed a forgery past Brinton, a commanding scholar who knew the language and culture well. Now, let's take a closer look at how the Walam Olum overlaps biblical history. But first, consider that it's actually the dissimilarities between the Bible and the Walam Olum that support its validity. If it was forgery made to just replicate the Bible's creation account, it would certainly not credit Satan for creating gnats, mosquitoes, and giant reptiles. It also would certainly not credit him for sending the flood, which was God's judgment on mankind. The Walam Olum's account of giants, which fits well within the framework of Scripture, was also not a common teaching at the time, and certainly would have not been emphasized by a forger. Even with these distinctions, the Walam Olum has incredible overlap with the Bible. We have the one great Manitou who made all things, beginning first with the earth, filling it with everything needed for life, then creating man and woman after. There's the evil black snake, hater of mankind, who brought turmoil and evil, and later the Makawini, the big men, or giants. This giant theme is also shared by at least 20 other Native American tribes. The giant reality in North America was even acknowledged by Abraham Lincoln and is confirmed by 885 records made by over 1,100 people who documented at least 3,000 giant skeletons discovered in North America. Many neighboring tribes, and even the Lenape themselves, were known to record their histories using wampum belts, bark, and wood tablets. They were even known to memorize songs connected to the glyphs, so long lines of chiefs and significant events could be easily memorized, just like the Walam Olum. We've documented several examples in our book about the Walam Olum. We even have eyewitness testimony from Nicholas Creswell in 1775 confirming that northeastern tribes transmitted their knowledge of past times by handing it down by hieroglyphs or traditions. In 1932, leading northeastern tribe researcher Frank Speck interviewed the hereditary successor to the line of Delaware chiefs named Joseph Montour, who said that he remembered the Delaware keeping records on wood, and even remembered an older tribesman referring to records that were called painted red or written red, records that existed and were known to the Delawares of his own and the preceding generation. Speck states, "I have no hesitation in affirming the authenticity of the Walam Olum, the Red Score, or whatever title such a document of tribal history bears, as a form of native iconography known to the Delawares of historic times, and as being a vivid memory of tradition in the mind of Joseph Montour, an undisputably reliable source of Delaware customs and language." There's even evidence that the original Walam Olum tablets were bundled in sets, because Rafinesque's original translation includes horizontal brackets at the end of the first and second songs, after the 16th, 32nd, 48th, and 64th verses of the fourth song, and after the 20th and 40th verses in Song 5. Thus, at every 16 and 24 lines, there is a bracket. Most of these are natural breaks in the story, but it may be that they mark 10 bundles of record sticks. Finally, there's the elephant in the room. The Walam Olum clearly documents a worldwide flood that was the result of the evil black snake bringing havoc into the world and humanity being saved by a single man, their Noah, called Nanabush, whom they refer to as the grandfather of all men, who saves humanity by a giant boat called the Turtle's Back in glyphs 2, 8 through 10. Echoes of Ararat documents over 300 flood legends in the Americas, and most of them have an incredible overlap with the Bible. Some are even right on top of biblical history, with the Toltecs placing the worldwide flood 1,716 years after the creation of the world, which is within just 100 years of the biblical time frame. Their story includes the Toplapet Lackali, an enclosed floating vessel, like an ark, and history stating that men multiplied and made a very high Ziquali, which means the highest tower, after the flood, just like the Babel dispersion account in Genesis. This account also reports that languages were changed and people were scattered to different parts of the world. They said they arrived in Mexico 520 years after the flood had passed. This is all incredibly matching to the biblical account. Regarding North American tribes, Squire states, the idea of a destruction of the world by water seems to have been a general amongst the Algonquin nations. The traditionary details vary in almost every instance where they have been recorded, but the traditionary event stands out prominently. The catastrophe is in all cases ascribed to the evil spirit, who, as already observed, was symbolized as a great serpent. All of this evidence has led our ministry to endorse the Walam Olum as an original, credible source of Native American history that clearly supports the Bible by overlapping its major themes, showing how they were carried by people across the globe after Babel. We would encourage you to watch our movie, Out of Babel, for more about the Walam Olum, and consider downloading our book that expands on the evidence we covered in this short video.